Hi, and welcome to another edition of On the Town. I'm Don Mackey, and my guest today is Dawn Starks, Chairman of the East Longmeadow Charter Commission. The Charter Commission was established in April at the town election, and Dawn was selected among the members to be the chairman. And at this point, it's August 21st, 2015, and the commission has really begun to tackle the final blueprint of establishing a form of town government that it believes is going to be in the best interest of the town for the next, 20 years. Dawn, thanks for coming.
Well, thanks for having me.
This has been an extremely interesting process, really from the very beginning. I remember meeting with, 12 or 15 folks right here in this room a year ago, February or March, really just to talk about people's concerns, and was it time to take a look at the structure of town government. And as of last night's meeting, you could give us a picture of what that commission has accomplished, and really with a mind of the amount of work and the amount of time that you as commission members have devoted to the process since the election.
Right. We started a group of core citizens who were concerned with what was going on in the town. Got together, you were correct, about a year and a half ago, collected 1,700 signatures, got the Charter Commission put on the ballot, and 9 members were voted in. We started meeting at the end of April, and our first mission was to do our due diligence. Over the course of the next 2 months, we met with every department head, we met with every elected board, we offered the opportunity for appointed boards to come and talk about how they function within our current structure of government. We went to 7 different towns and met with their head administrator, as well as one of their elected officials. And that was very illuminating as well. So we've had approximately 37 or more meetings with people, very in-depth. We get right to the point of what's working, what's not working. Where do you think there are opportunities for change and enhancement in this town? When we went to the other towns, we chose towns that each were fairly close because we didn't want to go out to Boston. They're kind of a different animal. And too far west is again another animal. However, locally we have quite a vast array of different forms of municipal government. For instance, Wilbraham has a form similar to ours right now, but they have a moderately strong town administrator. And as you recall, our town administrator, Nick Bro, went to Wilbraham. So we had interviewed him prior to going to Wilbraham, and then we went and let him settle in and interviewed him afterwards. And that in itself was illuminating in the amount of control that he has and his opportunity to make town government more efficient. Wilbraham, by its nature, because it's moderate town administrative duties, he has more power and he can keep things flowing a little bit better. We've been to Palmer, town of Palmer, which has had a lot of charter changes. They went from 9, they have a town council, they went from 9 who were ward representation because they have Bondsville and several different areas, down to 7, and now they're at large with a town manager. That's working very well. They had to work the kinks out. We have to keep in mind there is no perfect form of government. We went to towns with mayors. We ran the gamut. There are only a certain number of forms we can have in the state, so we went locally, listened, and learned.
So just what were some of the questions that you asked in any of these meetings? Questions to, say, town department heads. We'll go down the list.
We pretty much stayed to the same script, and it would go off in tangents. We would let whomever we were interviewing us lead us down the path. But it's what's working for you. A lot of times there wasn't a whole lot that was working for them, especially on, say, a board level. The department heads, we have very talented department heads and they make things work. However, there is confusion. So we were asking, well, how is there confusion? Lack of communication, operating in a silo, no common vision. So we would say to them structurally, what do you think could be changed? And it ran the gamut from, well, I think if we just talked a little more and met a little more, to, no, we need a complete top-down change and we need a point person. So it really ran the gamut, and then we would follow up pretty much along those lines.
And with the boards, sort of same questions, but really from a board point of view. And
yes,
what did you?
A lot of boards felt they were functioning very well, and they are functioning well on their own in their own silo. I think it's common knowledge that in town, probably the biggest perceived problem area is the executive branch, which is the Board of Selectmen. If you look at our past history, you can understand why. And some of these perceived problems are not directly structurally related. They had to do with the people who were in the positions, not following rules, giving the town, in my opinion, a black eye. That's tough to come back from, no matter who is in that position. And structurally, though, when you start to look at them, they really don't have a whole lot of power. They have certain departments that they are in charge of, but there's a lot that they're not. And we get boards, again, that are operating in silos. They may be operating well, but when you're operating in a silo, you have no idea what another board's policies are, or how to interact with the other board, or how to even, through the current structure we have, come to an agreement. I think we are suffering the effects of being stuck in maybe an antiquated system where, yes, back in the day, a handshake meant everything. And you could just go up to someone and talk to someone. Not that you couldn't now, but the world doesn't work that way anymore. And there needs to be structure.
And then, so again, similar questions when you went out into other communities, and some of those communities, now, of the, 7 or 8 that you
Yes.
visited, East Long Meadow has never had a charter.
Correct.
Were there other communities who are sort of still in the East Long Meadow form of the original structure basically created by the legislature? Or have they all gone through the charter process once?
The majority had gone through. I am not positive, but I believe Wilbraham, if any of them doesn't have one, it would be Wilbraham, but I'm not 100% sure. Our closest cousin would be Longmeadow, and they're having issues now. They went through it in a similar time frame as we did last time, and again, you don't always get it right, but at least with a charter, if you have correct or good provisions in your charter, you have an avenue to go back and fix it, rather than having to go through the hurdles of collecting signatures and trying to start all over again.
So I wonder if it would make sense just to clarify before we get into some of the details of sort of where we are now, just clarify the process that you're going through and what that leads to, and the timeline that you've set for yourself, and
Right.
how this thing, if it's
Right.
presented, actually becomes effective. And
Right. Okay. So we started at the end of April. We have a very aggressive timeline. We plan on presenting for the voters the charter that we are writing literally as we speak. April 12th, 2016. That's a very high hill to climb, but we're climbing it. Due to our research, we also hired the Collins Center, and they are a quasi-governmental agency that was put together by the state, who looked around and saw that a lot of towns are grappling with charter issues, either creating charters or having to make changes. And so they basically put together a coalition of experts who, for a very reasonable price, come into a town and provide research. The research has been phenomenal. I can say we've read probably over 30 charters, and they provide those. They give us legal opinions, so if we have a question of, if we were to do this, how does the state look at this? So they've been phenomenal, and they have been here for 3 meetings. And the thought was that once we got them, they have a blueprint of basically how we move through a meeting. We make all of the decisions, but they guide us as to know that we start with the legislative body, then we move to the executive body, and then to all the other moving parts. And there are a lot of moving parts to put together. And I love it as a chair, because I can sit there and I can look at the progression we're making, and it's kind of almost a fill in the blank. Once you decide what form you want, then you go point by point, and you can't really go off track. And it also provides for some great specific conversation,
Yes.
not general. And I have to say, give high kudos to everyone on the commission. They stay on track. The second we get off, someone comes and says, let's get on track.
Yeah.
So we are moving forward. We plan on having a public hearing in the middle of October, and we will be getting information out on that. We should have the lion's share of the blueprint done by then. So we will want to hear how people are perceiving it, what they've heard, what information and what misinformation they are hearing, so that we can make corrections as we go along and see, are we reading the situation correctly or not? Or where do we go from here if we're not? And then in April, it will be out. We also, the town is also responsible for mailing or getting in the hands of all voters a copy of the charter so they can read it line by line.
Right. And it also has to go some weeks before
Correct.
for
the-
approval by the legislator or the Attorney General.
Attorney General, and the deadline in that is the end of December. We've made an internal deadline for mid-December because the holidays, as you know,
Right.
get crazy for everyone, and I'm sure even the Attorney General's office will get backed up, and we don't want to miss a beat. So we've got our work cut out for us.
Well, just to go back to the role of the consultants, and I, as an observer, because I'm there taping the
Yes,
meetings.
you are.
But it's impressive, and I will say, it's an impressive group of people on the commission.
Yeah,
And
wide
the-
variety, depth of knowledge.
but very professional. The really, and I don't want to say the limited role that your 2 consultants have, but they really are not directing any conversation or suggesting any solutions. They're really there to present you with homework assignments. It
Yes.
was really funny last night to hear you talk about, well, our homework this week was,
Yeah.
and everybody's doing it.
And it's
a
tremendous amount
pile
of
reading,
homework.
Pile
It
of
is.
reading. But they're, I give a lot of credit too to the commission and to you and to those 2 folks from the Collins Center, really respecting the fact that this is the community's responsibility, and they're not imposing anything I'm
No,
surprised the
they're-
degree to which they just sit and listen and take notes. And
Very
then-
hands-off.
Yeah.
And
it's
will
impressive.
support with whatever documentation we need or want. And I'm impressed as well, because I was a little concerned, would they come in and say, you need to be doing this? Not at all. I also think a large part of that has to do with the composition of the commission.
I agree.
Where, as you said, it keeps coming back to, this has to serve the people, and we need to keep that in mind and make it as people-friendly as we can, because we've got some unfriendly elements right now just by the nature of the structure of our current form of government.
So let's sort of jump ahead. You began, I think, 3 meetings ago, really to tackle the actual blueprint.
Yes.
And as you noted before, kind of doing it in chunks, the first chunk being the legislative branch. We have had since 1894, when the town of East Long Meadow became its own town, and prior to that, since, I'm going to say well, you could go back to 1647, the settlement of Long Meadow, has had town meeting.
Yes.
So that's really the first piece that you all had to come to terms with. And I encourage people to go on the YouTube channel and watch that meeting of August 6th. And so where are you with that? I'll let you tell it.
Right. I thought it was really interesting that we started with the legislative, because we tend, I think, not just as commissioners, but as town citizens, to direct our focus to the executive branch. Well, the legislative branch is an extremely important part of our local government, as it is on the national scale and state. So I was kind of personally not really looking at that too much in depth, but it forced us to look at it and do the research. And the research really tells a story. We do not have participation from our active or our voters, our registered voters. You can look at the statistics and see it just going down and down to where the average town meeting is 2%. 2% of our population is making decisions that impact us on a daily level. And it's not just impacting us on a fiscal level, but on our quality of life as well, and the day-to-day running of the town. Even when there are push-button items, we're not getting the crowds we used to. I think part of it is just the nature of society today. We're very busy. Think about 20 years ago. We weren't slaves to our iPhones or computers. There was more interpersonal communication. You went to town hall. I bet there are a lot of people who've never even stepped into town hall. So they don't know what's going on. But when you look and you read about that, and then you think about, you could, in theory, have a group come in and upend the entire apple cart and just say, well, we're going to vote down public safety and school budget. No. For whatever reason, now the town's scrambling, because that is now voted into, that's basically your law. How do you fund these? I'm not saying that would ever happen. I would hope that common sense would prevail, and it usually does. But that could happen. That to me is frightening. So I went in thinking, I'm open to change. How much change, I didn't know. As I went down the road, and I'm speaking personally, started talking to people about town meeting. It was very interesting to me. People saying, you know, you can stack the house. It can work for you, but you can stack the house. Nobody shows up. All you see are usually retirees showing up. We've had instances where we don't even have at budget hearings. We have 9 people show up.
Right. $55 million,
Yeah.
and 9 people are.
So that started us down the road. having real discussions about the legislative body. To cut to the chase, what rose to the top was forming a town council. Now, we understand that there are people who are married to the town meeting. You will take away our right to vote. No, actually, I would venture to say you would have more of an opportunity to have your voice heard and heard by educated people than if you went to town meeting and spoke. You're speaking in front of a group of educated people who have studied the issues and are there to vote on behalf of the citizenry. Let me explain a little bit about town council
Sure, okay.
as well. We decided on 7 members. We had a discussion. We've been discussing this for 3 meetings now. So last night we decided it would be all 7 at large. We had discussed about precincts, but decided the at-large would work the best. 3-year terms, and no restrictions. When I say no restrictions, that means that any registered voter can run for town council. Which means if you're a policeman, town clerk, worker, you could run if you wanted. And the thought was, you're a voter of this town. We don't want to preclude anyone from that part. Now, they are responsible for meeting at least once a month, if not more often, depending on the circumstances, to determine things like budget, policy. This will help make our town much more efficient. Right now, we vote a budget annual town meeting in the spring. And then let's say we have a budget negotiation or contract negotiation and so we voted in May and the negotiation wraps up second week of June, but it hasn't been ratified or funded in the town meeting. Now it has to wait till October to be voted and funded. And you may say, well, that's not that long. If you're a worker in that department, that's a long time to wait. So it doesn't make sense. Wouldn't it make more sense to vote, and when the contract has been negotiated, vote yes or no, it's funded, and then within a week's time, it's funded. So we have a duty to our municipal workers as well. And same thing with any type of zoning changes. Citizen petitions can be heard. We've also put in place where the town council has to listen to the citizens. They have a spot at every meeting where they can bring things up. And there will be, we haven't gotten to how the procedure comes for townspeople to present articles, but there will be procedures there. So there is a potential there for you to show up 12 times a year at a minimum and have your voice heard.
Right. And the idea of essentially, representation on this council as the legislative body is, there's a pretty good likelihood that you're going to know one of those people, on a level at which you can go to that person and say, hey, I've got a concern about this, and is this something that the council would consider? And so you're maybe a little bit more accessible than having to wait till May and hope that you stand up at town meeting and maybe you're too shy or whatever.
Well, and it is formidable, I think, to
It
stand
is,
up at town meeting and speak. You've got your friends, your neighbors. People watch how you vote. It's scary. It really is. But it's a form and it's a tradition we've had, as you've said, forever. So that concerns me that people won't want to let go of tradition. But if we want our town to be competitive, and we're now competing not just against the Wilbrahams and the Hamdens of the world, we're competing on a global scale. And we need, my mantra is one town, one vision. We need to all be swimming towards the same shore so that we can be competitive and be a viable place for business and family and have a nice balance there. Right now, with everyone working in silos, it's not happening.
So last night you made a little bit more headway with the legislative branch, and before the close of the meeting was suggested that you spend a little bit of time delving into the executive.
Yes,
So that was preliminary,
correct.
but again, let's just recap that, sort of where you think that's going, and maybe why, and maybe what the concerns are, potentially from the voters' perspective.
Right. Well, in our research, we found time and time again people saying, we need centralized authority. We need someone watching out over all of the departments so they're all swimming towards that same shore. So with town council, you have two choices, basically. A mayor or town manager. We did not take a formal vote last night. However, we took an informal consensus. And the general consensus, pretty overwhelmingly, was town manager. I can only speak to my personal preference, which was town manager, which is that across the board over the past 15 or 20 years in all industries and service organizations and municipal governments, we have seen a professionalization of management. I think our town needs it. I think we need to be able to say, we need someone in here who has qualifications. I like qualifications of someone who's actually been in the position before, has a track record. What type of degrees do they have? What are their interpersonal skills? We can hire and we can fire that person if they're not working out well. I just think that the town deserves to have someone with the sole job of keeping everybody in line, everyone swimming towards the same shore, and being as efficient as possible, because we are not efficient right now. We've got things popping up all over the place.
Right.
And when it's disorganized, even the most organized person is going to have problems. It'll be a challenge, make no doubt, but I think town manager is the way to go.
And there was a little bit of sentiment or a question about the role of a mayor, and would what would the mayoral form bring? And I think I don't want to speak for you, but your argument, or the argument that was made last night, was you don't know what you're going to get with a mayor. A mayor is a political position
Correct.
rather than a professional position.
Yes.
And
I think one of the eye-openers to me was when we met with a town official who had been a mayor of a large city, Mike Sullivan, for 5 terms. And he says, when I was a mayor, I would go out and I would have people come up to me and sticks in my head. I was in 3rd grade with you in gym class, and you were going to be mayor, so I'm voting for you. He says, now, as a political figure, I'm going to say thank you very much, and I want that vote. But is that really the way to go?
right.
Because a mayor would be that one person who would keep this town running and swimming towards that same shore. And I think you may get a very qualified person. I know there have been some fantastic mayors, but you may not. And I suppose the same could be said with a manager. However, a manager is a much higher standard in terms of background
Right.
and resume. A mayor, all they have to be is a registered voter.
Right. So The hearing is scheduled for mid-October.
Correct, about October 15th.
The challenge, I think, that you've talked about, and part of the reason you're here, is to try, in a really tough environment, to get the information out
Right.
to people, to sort of break through that wall of non-participation, disinterest, disengagement, so that when this document appears, you don't have a large voting population saying, where did this come from? So talk a little bit about your ideas or the commission's ideas about how, because time is going by,
It is.
you would like to approach, and what residents, what role can residents play now in facilitating with the rest of the community? Let's vote on this with a body of information and awareness.
Right.
And that somehow it's not just the commission, it's not just LCAT that's responsible for that,
Right.
it's the community's responsible to make sure that everybody understands what they're voting on.
It is. This is quite the conundrum of how to break out and be seen. We've got so much information on a daily basis bombarding us. And this is local and oftentimes is not looked at. So we are on LCAT, all of our meetings are. Our meetings are open meetings, so they're posted on the town website. Within the town website, you can go into the Charter Commission, and we've got our minutes are posted. I'm not sure if it's up yet, but we want links to LCAT
It's
or
up.
YouTube.
It's up.
Okay, very good. And any information we can get, we are trying to put up there to be as open and transparent. That's the other key. We have had reporters from the Reminder come. We're trying to figure out how to get that word out, because you're right, we need an informed public
Right.
to not think that this charter has just dropped out of the sky. We can do postings on placards to come to the public hearing and that sort of thing. I know social media is very popular, and I've got ideas on that. Again, it's leading a horse to water, and how can we make that horse drink?
Right.
Hopefully they'll be engaged. I do know there is a segment of town residents who are engaged and are watching and listening, and all I can ask is that if you are one of them, engage your neighbor, engage your
right.
friend, direct them to that. I'm sure when the charter arrives at the doorstep in December, that will be an eye-opener
Right.
for them to actually read it. And we would like to have informational meetings and that sort of thing, so we can answer questions, clarify things.
And people are welcome to come to every meeting.
They are
There are open meetings. They're every other Thursday
at 6:30 at the Council on Aging in the media room. So we just met last week.
Last night.
Last night.
Last night.
So we will be meeting in 2 weeks. And as I said, we have an aggressive schedule. So next week, we need to see where we sit, because we may have to step it up a little bit and meet once a week,
On a weekly
depending
basis.
on.
Right.
We're making some good headway. Every once in a while, we get hung up on verbiage, but we do that purposefully because we want to make sure that it's for the townspeople.
Well, and I think, it's important to, I had this conversation with one of the other members last night after the meeting about, he was feeling a little bit of, I don't know, remorse is the word, but that there was a lot of discussion around what seemed like a fairly small topic that maybe didn't really warrant all that time. My suggestion was, you can write things sort of in the big picture and get the general framework, and that's fine, and you roll along, and that can work for a year and a half, it can work for 10 years. But it's always the little things
It is.
that crop up and nobody has the answer.
The one word.
The one word suddenly can just
Mean a lot.
pull the whole thing down. So you always have to at least look at that question. And it may seem arbitrary and silly to devote so much time to a word or to a phrase now, but
in
now's
the
the time to
future.
do it. Yeah.
Right. Try to get it right the first time. We
Right.
may not, but at least try.
Well, we'll be there every meeting, and the meetings are on LCAT on channel 192. They're also on LCAT's YouTube page. If you are watching this, you're probably already watching the meetings, but please, I think we'd both say, engage your neighbors, engage others who may not be aware. Take a little bit of that responsibility as a member of the community. If you feel that this process needs to move forward and succeed, be part of that process yourself and come to the meetings and, let's see where it goes.
Yes.
We'll do this again, maybe around the time of the public hearing.
Sure. Yes, that
And,
would be excellent.
Thank you so much for the update.
Well, thank you
and
for
thanks for all
having
the
me.
work you guys are doing. It's quite an effort.
It is, but it's worthwhile. This town is worth it. So I really hope people do want to see some change, because it is big change, but it's necessary change, I think.
That'll do it for this edition of On the Town. Dawn, thank you so much for coming in.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.